The last ferry pulled away without me. I turned around. She was still there too. "Looks like we're stuck," she said, smiling. One night. One empty island. No way home. I didn't know her name yet. By morning, everything about my life would change. She had a secret waiting to unravel. So did I. My name is Maya Sinclair, and I take pictures for a living. Mostly weddings. Mostly other people's happy endings. Never my own. That October evening on Widow's Bell Island, I never imagined a Miss Ferry would rewrite the story I'd been too afraid to write. I'd come to the island that morning to photograph an autumn elopement. Two strangers exchanging vows under a lighthouse nobody else remembered. The wedding ran long. The bride cried twice. The groom lost a shoe in the sand. And I lost track of the clock completely. I sprinted down Harbor Road at 6:15, camera bag banging against my hip, only to watch the ferry's wake curve toward the mainland. "You too," a voice called from the dock. I turned and saw a woman in a green field jacket, binoculars around her neck. Her name was Jordan Ellis, she said. A marine biologist studying seal colonies who'd lost track of low tide and daylight both. We stood there. Two strangers stranded by our own distraction, watching the only boat off Widow's Bell Island shrink toward the horizon. The ferry office was already dark. A handwritten sign taped to the glass. "Last crossing 6 p.m. See you tomorrow." "There's an inn," Jordan said, checking a phone with no signal. "Might still be open this late in the season." We walked together up Chapel Street, past shuttered gift shops and a diner with chairs stacked on the tables for winter. The Widow's Bell Inn had one room left, a double with a harbor view, and an innkeeper who barely looked up from her book. "One room," she said flatly. "Take it or sleep on the porch. Nothing else open past Labor Day around here." Jordan glanced at me, an eyebrow raised, and I heard myself agree before I'd fully decided anything at all. The room smelled like cedar and salt. Two narrow beds pushed against opposite walls like polite strangers. Jordan set her field bag down and pulled out a battered notebook, sketches of seal pups filling every margin in careful pencil. "You draw them?" asked, and she shrugged like it embarrassed her, though her hands kept moving across the page. "Data's not the same as memory," she said. "I like remembering what I actually saw, not just what I measured." Something about the way she said it made me want to know everything else she'd never written down. We found half a bottle of wine behind the inn's unattended honor bar, and left cash folded under the register. On the porch, wrapped in the inn's spare quilts, we watched the harbor lights blink on one by one across the water. "So what's your story?" "Maya Sinclair," Jordan asked, and I realized no one had asked me that in a long time. I told her about my mother's wedding photography business, the one I'd inherited along with unspoken expectations I still hadn't outgrown. She told me about growing up in Vermont, a father who fished, a childhood spent counting tide pools instead of friends. "You ever get tired of shooting other people's love stories?" she asked, and the question landed harder than she probably meant it to. "Sometimes," I admitted. "It's easier to frame somebody else's happiness than to figure out my own." She didn't push. She just nodded like she understood exactly what I meant, and somehow that was worse and better at once. By midnight the wind had picked up, rattling the porch shutters, and the innkeeper mentioned a storm system moving in from the coast. "Ferry might not run tomorrow either," she warned, disappearing back inside without further explanation, leaving us alone with that possibility. Jordan laughed. A real laugh. Surprised out of her. "Guess we're roommates a little longer than planned." I laughed too, though something in my chest tightened, unsure if I was afraid of being stuck or afraid of not minding it. We went back inside as the first drops of rain hit the windows, and I pretended not to notice her watching me undress the day's nerves. Neither of us slept much. I heard her shifting across the room, and once, quietly, humming something I didn't recognize. "Can't sleep either?" I whispered into the dark, and her voice answered immediately. like she'd been waiting for me to ask. We talked until 3 in the morning about nothing important, and somehow that nothing felt like the most honest conversation I'd had in years. By dawn the storm was in full force, rain slashing sideways, the harbor churning gray and furious beyond the fogged window glass. The inn's owner confirmed what we already suspected. No ferries, no boats, nothing leaving Widow's Bell Island until the weather broke. Could be a day. Could be 3, she said, sliding 2 mugs of coffee across the counter like this happened every autumn. Jordan caught my eye over the steam and grinned. Well, Maya Sinclair, looks like you're my problem for a while longer. I can think of worse problems, I said, and immediately wondered if I'd said too much. Too soon. Too honestly. We spent that first stranded morning exploring the empty town, cameras and notebooks in hand, mapping a place neither of us knew well. At the old lighthouse where I'd shot the wedding, Jordan pointed out a seal colony resting on the rocks below, oblivious to the storm. They come back to the same spot every year, she said. Even when everything around them changes, they know exactly where home is. I photographed her watching them, unposed, unaware. And it became the first picture I'd taken in months that felt like it mattered. That afternoon we raided the diner's locked pantry with the owner's blessing, cooking canned soup on a stove that barely worked. Jordan turned out to be a terrible cook and a worse liar about it, insisting the burnt garlic bread was rustic, not ruined. We ate anyway, laughing until my stomach hurt, and for the first time all year I forgot to check my phone for messages from home. As the rain kept falling, we built a fire in the inn's little sitting room, the only sound the crackle of driftwood and distant thunder. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Jordan said, firelight catching the sharp line of her jaw as she watched the flames. I hesitated, then told her about the woman I'd loved in college, and how I'd let my mother talk me out of it. Jordan went quiet for a long moment before she said softly, I know exactly what that feels like. You too, asked, and she nodded. I still on the fire. Like the memory still cost her something to look at directly. I'm engaged, she said suddenly, and the word landed in the room like a dropped glass, sharp and impossible to take back. My stomach dropped even though nothing between us had been named yet, even though I had no right to feel that loss. To a man, she added quietly. David. We've been together 5 years. My mother adores him. Everyone adores him. Do you? I asked before I could stop myself, and Jordan's silence answered more honestly than any words could have. I don't know anymore, she whispered. I said yes because it was easier than explaining what I actually wanted. I understood that sentence in my bones, because I'd built my entire adult life around the same quiet, cowardly logic. We didn't talk about it further that night, but something between us had shifted, careful and charged. Impossible to unknow now. I lay awake again, listening to her breathing across the room, wondering how 2 people could feel so recognized by strangers. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, I heard her whisper my name, testing it quietly in the dark like a question. Yeah, I whispered back, and she said nothing else. Just let the silence hold whatever neither of us was ready to say. The next morning the storm had softened to drizzle, but the ferry company posted another delay, citing dangerous swells near the harbor mouth. Jordan seemed relieved by the news in a way she tried to hide. And honestly, so was I. Though I hid it worse. We spent the day at her research site, and she taught me to identify seals by the pattern of scars on their backs. This one's Delilah, she said, pointing to an old female basking alone. She's outlived 3 mates and still comes back every spring. Sounds like someone I'd like to know, I said, and Jordan looked at me like she was memorizing my face for later. That evening, drying off by the fire again, she reached over and tucked a strand of wet hair behind my ear. Unhurried. Neither of us moved away. The fire popped, somewhere outside. The last ferry horn blew for a route we weren't on. Maya, she said, Voice low. I haven't felt like myself in 5 years. And 2 days with you undid all of it. I didn't answer with words. I leaned in, and she met me halfway. And the kiss felt like something long overdue finally arriving. We pulled apart slowly, foreheads touching, both of us breathing like we'd been holding something in for far too long. I have a fiancé, she said again, quieter this time, like she needed to remind herself more than me. I know, I said. I'm not asking you to choose anything tonight. I just wanted you to know this was real. She kissed me again. Softer. Like an answer she couldn't say out loud yet. And I let myself believe that was enough for now. We spent the rest of that stranded week the way you spend borrowed time. Greedy and careful in equal measure. Every morning I photographed the island's slow autumn light. And every photograph somehow had her at the edge of the frame. She started sketching me instead of seals, insisting she needed new subject matter. Though her cheeks colored when I caught her doing it. We told each other everything. Filling in years of our lives like we were racing against a ferry schedule neither of us wanted resumed. I learned her mother had raised her alone after her father's boat went down. And stability had become Jordan's whole religion since. David is stable, she admitted one night. Loving him felt like choosing safety. Loving you feels like choosing myself. I told her about my sister Claire. The golden child who'd married young and given our mother the wedding she'd always wanted from me. She still asks when I'm bringing someone home, I said. And I've spent 10 years giving her vague, hopeful nothing. Jordan took my hand across the porch railing, and for once, I didn't flinch away from being touched like I mattered. On the 5th night, the ferry company finally announced the water was calm enough to resume regular crossings starting the next morning. Neither of us said it out loud, but the news hit the room like a countdown we'd both been dreading and expecting. What happens now? Asked. And Jordan's silence stretched long enough that I already knew the answer wasn't going to be simple. I have a wedding in 6 weeks, she said finally. 400 guests. My mother's already picked the flowers. So this was just the storm talking, I said, hating how small my voice sounded even to my own ears. No, she said fiercely, gripping my hand tighter. This was the first honest thing I felt in years. I just don't know how to keep it. We didn't resolve anything that night. We just held on. 2 women pretending the sunrise wasn't coming whether we were ready or not. The ferry arrived at 8 the next morning, gleaming and ordinary, as if it hadn't just ended the strangest, best week of my life. We stood on the dock in silence, bags at our feet, the whole island behind us like a dream already fading at the edges. Can I call you? Jordan asked, and I nodded. Though we both understood a phone call couldn't hold what an island had. On the mainland, we said goodbye in a parking lot, quick and quiet, like 2 people afraid of being witnessed by their own lives. I watched her drive off toward Vermont, toward David, toward the wedding she told her mother she was still having. I drove home to Portland with salt still in my hair, and a photograph of Delilah the seal saved on my phone. My apartment felt smaller than I remembered, quieter. Like it knew something in me had changed and was waiting to see what I'd do about it. My mother called that same evening, asking about the elopement shoot, and I found myself unable to mention the island at all. You sound different, she said suspiciously, and I laughed it off. Though her instincts had never once been wrong about me. For 2 weeks, Jordan and I texted constantly, careful messages about seals and light and nothing, both avoiding the wedding looming ahead of her. I edited the elopement photos late into the night, and kept finding myself editing Jordan's photo again instead. Unable to stop looking at it. My best friend Renee noticed the shift in me before I said a word, cornering me over coffee with narrowed, knowing eyes. You met someone, she said. Not a question. And I finally told her everything. The storm. The fire. The almost impossible timing. She's engaged. Renee. To a man. In 6 weeks. Saying it out loud made the whole thing sound even more foolish than it felt. Doesn't sound like a small thing to walk away from, Renee said gently. But it also doesn't sound like something you can just forget. 3 weeks after the island, Jordan called instead of texting. Her voice tight, like she'd been crying before she dialed. David wants to move the wedding up, she said. His father's sick. They want it before Christmas instead of spring. My chest went cold. That's 5 weeks from now, I said. Doing math I didn't want to be doing at all. I don't know what to do. Maya, she whispered. And for the first time she sounded less like a scientist and more like a scared girl. I can't tell you what to do, I said, though every part of me wanted to beg her not to walk down that aisle. We hung up without resolution. And I spent that night staring at Delilah's photo, wondering if some creatures really did know how to find their way home. A month passed in careful, painful distance, both of us pretending the island hadn't rearranged something fundamental in each of our lives. Then Jordan texted a single line. I told David I need time. He doesn't know why yet. Can we talk? We met at a diner between our two cities, neutral ground, and she looked thinner, exhausted, like the truth had been eating her from inside. I keep dreaming about the island, she admitted, stirring coffee she never drank. About you. About Delilah. Stupidly enough, Delilah came back every year, I reminded her. Even after everything. She always knew where she actually belonged. Jordan reached across the table and laced her fingers through mine. Right there. In public. For the very first time. I'm scared, she said. Of my mother. Of David's family. Of losing everything stable I've ever built for myself. I'm scared too, I admitted. But I'm more scared of watching you marry someone while thinking about seals and storms and me. She laughed. And for a moment the diner felt as private and warm as the fire on Widow's Bell Island had been. We didn't decide anything that day either. But she didn't let go of my hand until the waitress came for the check. 2 weeks later, Jordan called off the engagement entirely, telling David the truth in pieces neither of us has ever fully detailed since. David, to his credit, took it harder than expected but didn't fight her on it, saying he'd sensed something missing for months already. Jordan's mother, however, was a different storm entirely, one that had been building far longer than the one that stranded us. You're throwing away a good man for what? Exactly. Her mother demanded over the phone, loud enough that I heard it from across the room. Jordan hadn't told her about me yet, only that the engagement was off, and her mother's grief sounded like betrayal already. Give her time, I told Jordan that night, though I secretly worried time wouldn't be kind to either of us in this particular case. Meanwhile, my own family remained blissfully unaware, and I realized I was more afraid of my mother's reaction than Jordan's had been. Claire called to ask. Again. When I was bringing someone home for Thanksgiving, and this time I almost told her the truth. There's someone, I finally admitted. Heart-hammering. A woman. Her name is Jordan. I really like her. Claire. Silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped, until Claire said quietly, Okay, when do I get to meet her? It wasn't the reaction I'd braced for, and I cried harder from relief than I had from any fear leading up to it. Mom's going to be harder, Claire warned. You know how she gets about the wedding stuff. About what she pictured for you. I knew. I'd built an entire career photographing the very dream my mother had always wanted for me and never quite let go of. Jordan and I decided together to face our families before the holidays, unwilling to keep living split between two separate, guarded lives. We started with mine, since Claire had already softened the ground, though I still felt sick with nerves the whole drive over. My mother opened the door, saw Jordan's hand in mine, and her face did something complicated I couldn't fully read in that first second. Well, she said finally, you'd better both come in before the roast burns. We can talk after dinner. Dinner was tense but survivable, my mother asking Jordan careful, probing questions about her work, her family, her intentions with obvious effort. Afterward, alone in the kitchen, my mother finally said what she'd clearly been holding back all evening long. "I always pictured a certain kind of wedding for you," she admitted. "I'm going to need time to picture a different one." "That's fair," I said, throat tight. "But I need you to try, Mom. Because this isn't a phase I'm going through." She nodded slowly, wiping her hands on a dish towel like it was the hardest conversation she'd had in years. Maybe because it was. Jordan's family proved far rockier. Her mother refused to meet me at all for nearly 2 months after the broken engagement. "She keeps saying I owe David an explanation," Jordan told me one night. Exhausted. Like loving you needs justifying to anyone. I watched Jordan carry that weight alone for weeks. And it started to change something quiet and worried in the way she held herself. "Maybe I should stay away," I offered one night. "Give your mom space. So this doesn't come between you two forever." "No," Jordan said firmly. "I already spent 5 years choosing everyone's comfort over my own truth. I won't do it again." That resolve became a turning point, though it also opened the door to the hardest stretch either of us had faced yet. Someone from David's family posted about the broken engagement online. Vaguer accusations wrapped around a barbed, unmistakable insinuation about Jordan and me. The post spread through their small Vermont town faster than either of us expected, reaching Jordan's research colleagues and funding board alike. Jordan's university position, still probationary, suddenly felt precarious. Whispers following her through the marine lab she'd worked years to earn. "They can't fire you for who you love," I said, furious on her behalf, though I knew the world rarely worked that fairly. "They don't have to fire me outright," she said grimly. "They just have to make the next grant renewal quietly disappear." We fought about it that week, our first real fight. Her fear curdling into distance, my anger curdling into pushing too hard. "You don't understand what it's like to build something from nothing and watch it threatened over gossip," she snapped. And I went quiet. She was right. My career had never depended on anyone's approval of who I loved, and I'd underestimated what she stood to lose. We didn't speak for 4 days, the longest stretch since the island, and I spent them terrified this was where it ended. On the 5th day, Jordan showed up at my apartment unannounced, eyes red, holding the same battered sketchbook from the inn. "I drew you again," she said, opening to a page of me on the porch, quilt around my shoulders, laughing at something unseen. "I don't want to lose this because I'm scared," she said. "I just don't know how to protect us both at once." "We figure it out together," I said, pulling her inside. "You don't have to carry this like it's only yours to fix." We decided to face the rumor head-on instead of hiding from it, and Jordan requested a meeting with her department chair directly. To our surprise, the chair, a quiet woman named Dr. Okafor, said the university's non-discrimination policy protected exactly this kind of situation. "Let them talk," Dr. Okafor said. "Your research speaks louder than gossip, and I intend to make sure your renewal reflects that." It wasn't a fairy tale ending to that particular battle, but it was armor. And it was enough for Jordan to breathe again. Around the same time, Jordan's mother finally agreed to meet me, though the invitation arrived cold, more obligation than warmth. We drove to Vermont together, and I spent the entire trip rehearsing sentences I abandoned the moment her mother opened the door. Her mother's house smelled like wood smoke and old photographs, walls lined with pictures of a family built around loss and careful stability. "You're the one from the island," her mother said. Not quite a question, studying me like she was deciding something important. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "I'm also the person who loves your daughter, and who isn't going anywhere, whether or not you approve." Something in my directness seemed to surprise her, and for a long moment she just studied me across the kitchen table. "My husband drowned believing the sea would always bring him home," she said quietly. "I built my whole life around never trusting that kind of risk again. I understand wanting to protect her, I said carefully. But Jordan isn't a risk. She's the steadiest person I've ever known. Her mother's eyes filled. Unexpectedly. And she looked at Jordan like she was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. You do seem steadier, she admitted to Jordan. Happier than you were with David. If I'm being honest with myself, it wasn't full acceptance. Not yet. But it was a door left open instead of slammed shut. And that felt like enough for now. We drove home that night with Jordan's hand resting on my knee the entire way. Quiet. Grateful. Exhausted in the good way. 2 months later. My mother asked, almost shyly, whether Jordan might like to come to Thanksgiving. If that's something you both want. I nearly dropped the phone. It was the first time she'd invited Jordan by name instead of calling her, your friend. Thanksgiving arrived with Jordan beside me at the table. Claire's kids drawing seals on their napkins after hearing the island story from her. My mother watched us across the table, and at one point, quietly, without ceremony, refilled Jordan's glass before anyone had to ask. It was such a small gesture. But I felt something in my chest finally unclench after years of holding my breath around my own family. That winter, Jordan's research funding came through. Secured despite the gossip. Proof that Dr. Okafor's confidence hadn't been misplaced after all. We started talking. Cautiously. About what came next. About whether Portland or Vermont or somewhere entirely new might become our shared home. What if we go back? Jordan said one evening. Not to stay stranded, but to actually choose the island this time. We drove up together that spring. The ferry running smoothly under clear skies. Nothing like the storm that had first stranded us there. The Widow's Bell Inn was open for the season, and the same innkeeper raised an eyebrow, clearly remembering exactly who we were. One room, Jordan said to her, grinning. And this time neither of us hesitated for even a single second. We found Delilah on the rocks below the lighthouse. Older. Guard. Still returning to the exact same spot every single spring. She still comes back, Jordan said softly, watching her. No matter what changed around her, she still knows where she belongs. Standing there, camera in hand. I finally understood the photograph I'd been trying to take since the night we met. It wasn't the lighthouse, or the seals, or even the storm that had first thrown us together against both our will. It was this. 2 women who'd stopped performing the lives everyone expected, and chosen instead the one that was actually true. That night, on the same porch where it started, Jordan asked me to stay. Not for a storm, but for good. And I said yes. Then